All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming to today's town hall. I think a few more folks are probably going to be streaming in. So first, a few introductions. My name is Felix Rivera. I serve on the Anchorage Assembly representing Midtown District 4, and I am the chair of the Assembly's Housing and Homelessness Committee. I am here joined by two other individuals who will be presenting today, and I'll let them introduce themselves.
Hi, John Weddleton, citizen of Anchorage.
Owen Hutchinson, and I'm with the Anchorage Coalition to End Homelessness.
Great. Well, I just want to really appreciate everyone for coming here today. This is the next phase of a discussion, which began in March when the Assembly approved the creation of the Clean Slate strategy, which is a process for us as a community to stand up a new permanent year-round low-barrier shelter by the end of the year, preferably by November 1st. This is the first of 3 town halls where we're going to be talking about shelter basics and criteria. For those interested, the slides are on the Assembly website under the Homelessness Focus page. So there's going to be a lot on the agenda today, but I want to assure people that a majority of the time in this town hall will be allocated to public participation and Q&A. So I want to start with giving a little bit of the lay of the land, starting from pre-COVID, moving on to during COVID, and then post-COVID, because it's, I think, 3 distinct phases. This isn't going to be exhaustive, and it's not going to really be a homelessness 101, right? That's not what this town hall is for. I'm going to be focusing on a few things, starting with the municipality's role when it comes to homelessness and how that has changed. Funding decisions that the municipality has made. And then I'm going to be using Brother Francis Shelter as an example, as until the Sullivan Arena, they were really our only low barrier shelter in the community. And then going to be using the January point in time count as a reference. Of note, the point in time count is a little bit imperfect of a data point. It captures people experiencing homelessness as a snapshot on one day during the dead of winter, and the methodology over the years until very recently has been a bit all over the place. So use this number with a grain of salt, but I think it is an interesting reference point from year to year. So this particular slide is pre-COVID lay of the land. So the municipality's role was extremely limited. We provided emergency cold weather shelter per Anchorage Municipal Code 16.120, which is the part of municipal code which requires us to have emergency cold weather shelter if the ambient temperature gets to 45 degrees or below. And that has at least when I began serving on the assembly, and then prior when I worked in the mayor's office, that was typically done at Beans Cafe at approximately 100 or so individuals. And then there were also warming stations that were set up. I know for a while the Downtown Transit Center, when it was used, was set up as a warming station. And that was pretty much it for the municipality's role when it came to homelessness. The first time that funding was provided by the municipality with regard to homelessness was to assist with year-round shelter, and that happened in 2019. I believe it was $730,000, which were added to the budget to assist with year-round shelter needs. Again, pre-COVID, Brother Francis Shelter, as really the only low-barrier shelter in the municipality, had roughly about 240 individuals. They might have go up a bit beyond that, but that was their capacity. And then a couple of reference points in terms of the point in time count done in January. So if you look at the 2015 data, there were 179 individuals unsheltered, 1,029 individuals sheltered, for a total of 1,208 in the system that were counted. Then if you compare that to 2019, the numbers actually went down a little bit. So 97 individuals unsheltered, 1,014 individuals sheltered, for a total of 1,111. So then sort of the next phase is talking about during COVID-19, right? During the pandemic, what did the lay of the land look like? The municipality's role expanded exponentially. We stood up the COVID-19 mass care sites, including the Sullivan Arena, and multiple non-congregate sites at hotels. And there were a few other locations at the beginning that were also stood up. Folks may remember the Oscar Airline Center. I think the Fairview Rec Center was used for a little bit. It was a lot that was stood up by the municipality at the beginning of the pandemic. Because of these sites, we didn't really have to stand up emergency cold weather shelter, because that shelter was provided as part of the mass care sites. The alcohol tax, when it comes to funding, began impacting the system, the homelessness prevention response system, in 2021. So that is when we were able to, because of the passage of the alcohol tax, start making more investments. And as folks will remember, one of the buckets, there's 3 buckets in the alcohol tax. One of the buckets deals with homelessness, substance misuse, and mental health. Most shelters reduced their census during COVID-19 to meet the CDC guidelines for distancing. So Brother Francis Shelter, again using them as the example, as the, not anymore because Sullivan Arena was stood up, but traditionally the only low barrier shelter, they went from 240 plus down to approximately 75, I believe was the number that they were at during COVID-19. If we look at the January 2021 point in time count, the numbers were 152 unsheltered, 1,167 sheltered, and then for a total of 1,319. So then what's the current lay of the land? So the municipality's role changed a little bit. No more COVID-19 mass care sites. So the Sullivan Arena was opened as an emergency shelter, shut down as an emergency shelter in 2022, then opened again later in 2022, and then most recently shut down again. So we've had a little bit of an on again, off again with the Sullivan Arena. And then there were emergency cold weather shelter really beefed up drastically to meet the need because all of the COVID-19 mass care sites were shut down. Now, in terms of spending, the spending went up pretty big when it came to shelter, specifically winter shelter. So there was approximately like $11.8 million spent during the 2022-2023 winter, primarily alcohol tax funding that was heavily relied on to pay for these needs. Frankly, there are other priorities. Like I said, there's 3 buckets of spending in the alcohol tax. There are other priorities for alcohol tax that are going to reduce our ability to rely on it for emergency cold weather shelter into the future. Sorry not to point these folks out, but I think a couple of assembly members have joined us, so there are some chairs up here on the stage. Most shelters went back to what I think is a realistic census that matches their staffing levels. So Brother Francis Shelter, again, went from that 240 pre-COVID, 75 during COVID, post-COVID, 120. That is the staffing level that Brother Francis Shelter right now feels, the census level, Brother Francis Shelter feels like they can maintain and adequately staff and provide services for the clients. The January 2022 point in time count showed 125 individuals unsheltered, 1,369 individuals sheltered for a total of 1,494. January 2023 showed 335 unsheltered, 1,425 sheltered for a total of 1,760. So what does that point in time count look like from a continuum? So this graph shows the longer context over the years, and it's super obvious the reason why we are in the current predicament. If you look at that gray line, a lot of the number in that sheltered line, the gray line, those individuals currently, a lot of them are now unsheltered. So we need more shelter in our community. Like I said earlier, this isn't a Homelessness 101, but there are a lot of great resources for folks to review, including these links here, the Anchorage Coalition to End Homelessness website, and then the Assembly has a couple of different focus websites. One of them is a homelessness focus website, and then another is a housing focus website. Because whenever you talk about homelessness, you should also be talking about housing. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to the representative from the Anchorage Coalition to End Homelessness to run us through the next few slides to talk about the 5 keys to effective shelter.
Thank you, Felix. Again, my name is Owen Hutchinson, and I work with the Anchorage Coalition to End Homelessness. We are the lead agency for the Continuum of Care for Anchorage. A continuum of care is a geographic area. There are 400 of them in the United States, and they're a requirement to receive funding from the Department of Housing and Urban Development. They have 4 main community roles. One is the design and implementation of the homeless prevention and response system. One is coordinated entry, which is an assessment, assessing somebody's needs and vulnerabilities, and prioritizes them for housing based on those needs and vulnerabilities. You have to collect data to track outcomes for the COC, the continuum of care. And then you also want to, what is the 4th one? Community prioritization and engagement. And the Department of Housing and Urban Development doesn't fund emergency shelter. We recognize it as an important part of the homeless prevention and response system. It can be a touch point, but they focus on housing and services. And so we want emergency shelter to also have a housing focus. Yes. And I think the big takeaway is that what we see is if a shelter is safe, if people feel safe in a shelter, that the community around that shelter are also safe. If there is not theft, if it feels calm when you go in, if you would be willing to go in and stay there, then this is the kind of shelter you want in your neighborhood, and also you're going to see a lower community impact. And this is a question that we've been asking policymakers this last year to really kind of locate this question in their own experience. If you walked into Brother Francis, if you walked into Sullivan, would you feel safe sleeping there? Would you feel safe going to work and leaving a bin of your belongings there and coming back at night? God forbid that would have to happen, but if it did, would that be a place you would be willing to go? So the first key is a housing-first approach. This means low barrier, that the policies and practices will assess anybody who walks in the door, and immediately when somebody goes in the door, you're starting to work with them, thinking about what is their exit to housing. It might not be on the first day they show up. They might need a hot meal and a night of sleep before they can engage in that conversation. But as soon as somebody walks into a shelter, there needs to start to having case managers and trust being built with the staff there to think, what is the shortest possible stay for you in this shelter? What is your pathway out of homelessness? This is really important because people have a done a bunch of stuff going on in their lives, right? They might have a substance use disorder, they might have a mental illness, they might not have a job, right? And all of those things have really specific interventions that can help them. So if it's a substance use disorder, it could be medically assisted treatment, or it could be a 12-step program. And these case managers should be really talking to them about all the things that they might need based on what there's going on in their life. But for their situation of homelessness, the thing that's going to end that is getting them into housing. And the case managers need to be working with people on what is their plan for a short stay in the shelter. Safe and appropriate diversion. To the greatest degree possible, case managers and shelter workers should be really strategizing with these folks on what other resources do they have in their lives? What other family members do they have in their lives? What we see is that anyone could fall into homelessness, but it is very difficult to get out of. Issues that you have going on in your life compound. The longer you're homeless, the more expensive it is to get you out of that situation because you need more services. So we want to decrease the stay, but also we want to be working with people to say, what do you have going on in your life that you might be able to leverage to get you out of even staying in the shelter at all? This doesn't mean if somebody hasn't eaten, hasn't slept, needs a shower, that they shouldn't have access to those things. But doesn't also mean that the shelter is the right place for them. So we really want to be focused on, to the greatest degree possible, decreasing the inflow into emergency shelter because they are very difficult places to stabilize and move on to housing from. Immediate and low barrier access. This means that the most difficult person, the person with the highest need and most difficult behaviors need to be able to be served by this location. This means staff trained in de-escalation. This means people having safe rooms where they can go and yell at the wall if they need to yell at the wall, so it's not disturbing the other people who need to sleep and need to go to work the next day. It really means staff who are trained to respond to behaviors and not just enforce rules. We know that it needs to be welcoming and that people need to be willing to come back. So even if somebody's been asked to take a break, to go for a walk, to calm down and come back, that they are welcomed back, and that this is the place where we're going to start having these conversations about their ultimate goal of housing. I'm not going to read all of this. I think you can download it if you want to. This is really for shelter providers. And this is really a kind of assessment that needs to be happening ongoing. This is difficult work, I will say. This is really hard when you are seeing a population every day in some of the most difficult moments of their lives, and you're seeing them come back and leave and come back again. So I'm not saying this is easy, but this is really important that any emergency shelter that's funded by the Muni needs to really consider how they are enforcing rules. What are the expectations of the place? Do people have buy-in on the expectations? Are they clearly marked so people aren't just being kicked out for no reason? So that staff can't just choose who they like or who's easy to work with. Staff is required to work with everyone, including the most difficult clients, and get them into housing and the services they need to maintain that housing. And then again, this is just housing-focused rapid exit. The longer somebody is homeless, the more expensive it is to get them into housing. We need to have these conversations from the moment somebody is able to really focus and have a real honest conversation with a staff member about what their plan is to get into housing. This is housing-focused shelter. And then data. We need to know where people are going. We need to know people where they're coming from when they're coming into the shelter. We need to know, did we try and house them last year? And we housed them for 8 months, but we didn't have the services right? They needed childcare, and they needed counseling, and they needed whatever other service it is that they needed. We need to know where we're failing, and then we need to shift and say, this person actually, yes, can be housed. We're gonna get them in a unit with their daughter and maybe their aunt can come and help with the child care, right? That this case management and service overlay on housing needs to be responsive to the individual or family that it is trying to house. And without this data, we're not going to be responsible to the community. We're not going to be responsible to the Department of Housing and Urban Development and how their money is being spent. And it can help us understand on a smaller level with an individual what has worked and what hasn't worked, right? They might need more services and a higher level of care within their housing, and that a lighter touch was not the thing. And this is all data that we track and that we also share on our website. It's the ach.org/data, and we are audited every year, and we send that data to the federal government, and they go through a fine-tooth comb on it all. So it is really available to all of us. I also just want to say that this is more accurate than the point-in-time count. Part of that increase you see in the point-in-time count is during COVID, HUD allowed us to count over multiple days, and also allowed us to do more street outreach. And the purpose was they really wanted to capture the unsheltered population more accurately. I'll tell you, every continuum of care in the Northwest, because I was on the meeting with them, said, thank you for allowing us to do this over multiple days. Part of the danger of that is you might have duplicate entries, and they recognize that, but they said, we want a better number. And if we overshoot it, it's better than undershooting it, because we need to know the scope of the issue. So that point-in-time count number is not as accurate. We have month over month real-time data available to our community, which is really unique and special. So our data quality is actually a little bit above what is required by the government.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for walking us through all of that. So moving on to shelter licensing. In 2021, the Assembly passed an ordinance approving shelter licensing for really one primary reason. We needed a quality assurance tool. Licensing was never meant to be burdensome, but definitely had a lot of considerations for shelters. So the purpose and intent of shelter licensing, and I'm just going to read some of this because I think it's illuminating. So the purpose of this chapter is to establish minimum standards of care and operation for homeless shelters in the municipality, enable and maintain data collection and monitoring of the homeless population, to maintain appropriate oversight in order to provide individuals and families experiencing homelessness with the care and services needed, and mitigate impacts of neighboring residents, businesses, property owners, and the users of the shelter. So, as you can see, the purpose and intent gets to a lot of the things that I hear and concerns about shelter, but we'll get to that in a little bit. So these next few slides walk us through a variety of what I call neighborhood protections that were considered in the creation of shelter licensing. So in particular here, there are two mentioned that are included in that chapter in municipal code for shelter licensing. One of them is the ability for the director, meaning the Anchorage Health Department director, or the assembly to impose conditions or restrictions on a license if it is in the interest of the public to do so. Another is the need for a good neighbor policy that details the applicant's plan for community communication, minimizing neighborhood impacts, including policing of trash and loitering on or near the premises. Another neighborhood protection included in shelter licensing is a policy and procedure for ensuring the safety of clients, staff, volunteers, and visitors. I think, as Owen said, if people feel safe in a shelter, then they're less likely to have unsafe behaviors outside of the shelter. And the need for policies and practices that deter and reduce client loitering and prohibiting camping in parks and public spaces and other impacts on neighboring residents, businesses, and property owners. Another neighborhood protection is commitments, and it specifically talks about commitments in relation to minimizing neighborhood impacts. What is the shelter's commitment, but also what is the municipality's commitment? Because shelters can't do all of this work on their own. The municipality has to have some skin in the game, and so this really outlines what that looks like for both shelter and the municipality. And then the last, and you might not be able to read that fairly well, but there's a whole section in there that's all about enforcement, of how we enforce shelter licensing, how we deal with complaints, and how the health department, which they're the responsible department for enforcing shelter licensing provisions, how they can work with shelters to hopefully improve if there are issues that shelters are having. So, although shelters licensing went into effect on January 1st of this year, the only the only shelters that are licensed have provisional licenses. They don't have full licenses just yet. And largely, shelter licensing is not really being implemented in the way that is envisioned in the plain text of the language. So that's certainly something that needs to be improved. It will be, though, come November 1, when a new shelter is stood up. For certain, the intent there is to make sure that shelter licensing is bolstered and we have the ability to actually implement the text of the language. So at this point, I am going to turn it over to John Weddleton, who authored the next set of slides to walk through some examples of well-run shelter.
Thanks. Can I stand?
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry. So just more comfortable standing. And Felix, I forgot to tell you that you get extra points if you sit up front, so you all can gain in a hurry here. So I just want to, before I start, kind of set the table and where I came from with dealing with homelessness. And decades ago, I helped clean up some camps in the woods with Ed O'Neill, who owned Brown Jug, and formed Arbor, which was very actively cleaning up the camps. And other than that, my experience was very similar to anyone else in Anchorage. I'd drive by 3rd Avenue and see Brother Francis and Beans and say, gosh, this looks terrible, it shouldn't be like that. And then, of course, what we saw at Sullivan Arena, just seeing what people see. In my time at the Assembly, it was during that time when we were significantly ramping up our involvement. Of course, I learned a lot through there. But when so I guess the take, you think, oh, shelter means damage to a neighborhood, because we've seen that in, Brother Francis in particular over many years, maybe not so much now. But when I travel just on family trips, I'd carve out some time to see, what do they do? This is a nationwide problem. What are they doing about their homeless? And I came away very surprised at what I saw at different shelters. So I think if we look at, and I guess the takeaway will be, what I learned is that shelters can help areas that have a lot of problem with homeless. It's a place for the people who are living on the streets to go, and does not have to damage a neighborhood. In fact, can help. So if you can move, we'll look at Pine Street Inn. And I visited Pine Street Inn a couple times. Once I just showed up, knocked on the door and said I could get a tour, and the armed guard was there, said no. So I just walked around, talked to some people in the streets, mostly shop owners. There weren't people lingering in the streets so much. A couple of the residents I talked to. But this is a location, you cannot tell this is a shelter unless you read the sign, and it says it's a shelter. It has over 500 residents in there, about 100 are women in an separate but attached building. And it's been there for decades. The next time I went there was about 3 or 4 years later, and I did get a tour, and I think we could look at some, next slide shows a little bit of the interior. So it's nothing fancy. It's like Brother Francis, where it's got, bunk beds. This is a, big shower area. It's about what you expect. It's mostly this kind of congregate area. They also do have apartments for people who've been there long term. The intent in any shelter is move them in, move them out. But some people are there longer. I think they had one person that had been about there 30 or 40 years. But he worked there, so kind of kept things going. But this is very well run. It's been there for decades. A couple key points is, one is they have very close connection with the neighborhood. And if anyone in that neighborhood, any business or homeowner has trouble, they can call Pine Street Inn, and they'll send a team out to deal with it. And whether it's a resident or not, they'll deal with it. There's also less than a mile away, maybe half a mile, 3/4 mile away, it's just amazing service center, and that's St. Francis House. Pine Street Inn is not intense with services, but this place is incredible. A huge cafeteria, a huge clinic. It even has a room where if someone's high, they can go in there and safely get through it. They just, whatever people need, they have mailboxes, they have job placement, all those kinds of services you think that people need is at St. Francis House. It's just incredible. And that kind of service center also serves a smaller shelter that's not too far away either. So this area has a couple shelters. So what it showed me there, and in fact, right across the street, literally across the street from Pine Street Inn, they built a large, I don't know, it was an 8, 9, 10-story condo development, $1 million condos. This area is gentrifying. They had a farmer's market right around the corner. So, this is not, a shelter does not have to damage the neighborhood. So moving on, another trip took me to Omaha. And I went for a run in the morning, it was a couple hour run going around. And then this is more about St. Francis House. I think I covered that. Yeah, it was a great service area. So I went to Omaha and went for this run, and then I was going to meet with someone who was going to give me a tour of one of the shelters there, and it was this one, Open Door Shelter. And I went, oh, I ran by this morning. I had no idea I was running around a shelter. And this is quite large. I mean, they serve hundreds of people here in a variety of different ways. They have congregate shelter, this is faith-based, and you cannot come in drunk or stoned, so it's not completely low barrier. But they also have apartments, and the apartment buildings look somewhat like what Cookland Housing builds, so that you can start in that shelter, and they have a place to move you over time. They have job training. They actually have a store there where you can work, so you learn how to work, and you can shop and learn how to shop. Some people simply don't know how to shop even, so they're teaching them these skills. They have a large nursery garden area where people can learn how to garden, but it's bringing people in and kind of lifting them up, and it's really impressive. But it's not what you would think a shelter, like a building. This is a campus that puts all these services together. It's just incredible. So after this, I said, well, there's another big one. I'm gonna go look at that. So I just crashed it, knocked on the door, and that is Sienna Francis House. This is an absolute low barrier. You come as you are. But again, it's a campus, and I had run by this one in the morning too and had no idea it was a shelter. But it has a large congregate area where you sleep on a mat on the floor, or it might have been cots. But they also had some level of housing. They had a vet's village. They had another building that was in operation for substance abuse recovery. They had job training. They had day centers where a large area where people could spend the day. They also did services there for people who weren't residents. They had connexes where people could just store their stuff. They get a big tub and could store their stuff safely. And they had they had showers in a trailer that was outdoors, so people who weren't staying there could take showers as well. But again, it was amazing because you have people in there with a shelter, and they didn't say, well, you need this service, just go over there, it's about 3 miles away, and you can go, and it's called this, go get some help. They could say, go to that red door over there. I'll walk you there, or go to this one. It was just amazing. They had everything together. And again, I could not tell that this was a shelter when I had walked around it. It doesn't come across that way at all. So we could go. So now this is another one that was interesting. This is Schrader House. This is in Hollywood. And I wasn't there for Schrader House. I was there to see stars on the sidewalk. And so what is this interesting building? And what they did is there are people, we have people in the woods. Most of these big cities don't have woods, so they're sleeping on the sidewalks in the alcoves and buildings. It's right there. You're tripping over them. And this neighborhood said, we're sick of this. What are we going to do? They put in this shelter right in the middle of their neighborhood. And that freaked out some of the neighbors. Right next to houses. These are expensive houses. You're going to put a shelter? Well, they made a commitment. They said, we're going to put the shelter here for these people who are sleeping on your sidewalk. And we're going to make a commitment that there will be zero tolerance for people sleeping in pitching tents in your neighborhood anymore. They have to go here. So that was the package deal. The commitment at the time was it would only be there, I think, 2 or 3 years, but I just Googled it the other day, and it's still there. So I think I was there in 2019 or 18. But it's fairly small, 72 beds. It is a sprung shelter, which we've talked about for potentially shelter here. And it's actually very nice. I mean, you can get some, skylit. They have trailers where they have their offices and so on. And actually inside is not a mat. People get like an office cubicle where they have a cot and they can store their stuff and lock it up. It's kind of a nice situation there. But again, this one was specifically put in that neighborhood to help that neighborhood with a homeless problem. And it must have worked because they didn't tear it down or pack it up after a couple of years. So I think did I have another slide or is that it? Okay, so I guess the key takeaway is, we think of shelters, think, oh, it's going to destroy my neighborhood. If you have troubles with homeless, and we do throughout Anchorage, a shelter can help your neighborhood by giving those people some place to go that's not in your neighborhood, and then get them up and get them help. Thank you.
Thank you so much, John. So these next few slides speak to some additional characteristics of shelters that are well run. So they promote dignity and respect. And I'm not gonna read most of that language up there. They meet people where they are, and they provide adequate services to navigation. And that's really critical. That's whether that's housing navigation or other navigation to other services that folks need. It's really critical. And that they are focused on housing first and getting people out of shelter. The goal for shelter should not be for folks to stay for years on end. The goal for shelter really should be to run it as an emergency, and that folks should come, they should stay for a limited amount of time, and they should be moved on to the next phase, whether that's shelter, transitional housing, substance use treatment, whatever that next phase may look like. So now moving on to criteria, which is the last set of slides before we get to public comment and Q&A. The facilitated collaborative process, which is a process that was created in July of 2021, right after the Bronson administration came on board, was a collaboration between the Assembly and the administration to try and find solutions. A lot of good came out of that process, including setting up new housing and the complex care shelter, but the one thing that we couldn't agree on was low barrier shelter. The group at the time came up with a list of criteria to consider in 3 phases. This slide shows you some of the initial screening criteria that were considered. Things like, is the building even available? Are there utilities? Can you use it as congregate care? Are you avoiding areas with high density of other operations that are serving the same population of people experiencing homelessness? The building condition, are we trying to go into a building that is actually ready to be used as shelter, or is that gonna be another capital expense? So those are some of the initial screening criteria that were used. Then this slide shows the next level criteria used, and it's much more extensive. Things like costs, cost per client, proximity to medical and health care, proximity to personal supports. Is there safe ingress and egress? What's the road traffic look like? Can the space accommodate pets? Can it accommodate couples? Can it accommodate storage? What land use conflicts might exist? Is there public transit within a quarter mile? Is the zoning appropriate? So all of those are some of the next level criteria that were looked at. And then I might actually call on John to help define this last one, but this is long-term care criteria that the facilitated collaborative process looks like. And John, do you have a definition for that?
Which is it?
Long-term care.
No.
Fair enough. Well, that was in the documentation that I reviewed, was another set of criteria that the facilitated collaborative process looked at. Oh, that's fancy. In addition, the Assembly stood up an emergency cold weather shelter task force to come up with a plan for the 2022-2023 winter season. And because this is centered around an emergency situation, the criteria that was used there were much more limited, right? Can it be used 24/7? Is there space to provide meals, and is there showers? Those were the 3 basic criteria for the emergency cold weather shelter that was reviewed. And I think that takes it through the criteria that has been considered to date. So a little bit on some ground rules for the audience participation, which is the next phase that we're moving towards. I am going to have a timer on my phone, and I'm gonna ask folks to please respect the 3-minute timer to allow everyone a chance to speak. And then I'm gonna ask folks to remain solution-oriented. While your comments can be critical, if that's the type of comments that you have, I want us to be in a better place at the end of the day than when we began. And that means really trying to remain focused on solutions as much as possible. And then when I encourage folks to ask questions, and if it's possible, we will respond, or we might take that question and offline and try to see if we can get some responses to it. As we continue this work, here are some really helpful prompts that it would be great for folks to respond to if you are comfortable participating in audience participation. So again, the phase that we are in right now is mainly centered around criteria and well-run shelter. So for criteria, what criteria for a shelter are important to you? Mitigation, what does neighborhood mitigation look like to you? And then shelter, what does well-run shelter mean to you? For folks who may not be comfortable speaking, there are some butcher sheets that are on the wall in the atrium there, and there are some markers. So if you want to take a marker and just write on the butcher sheets, if you're not comfortable speaking, feel free to do that, and they'll be incorporated into the record. So with that, we have 2 mics. If folks want to come up, no need to line up, but if you do want to come up to one of these 2 mics available, then we would be happy to hear from you. I don't think the mics are on, so if you can just turn them on, please.
1, 2. Okay. For the record, my name is Sean Williams, and I want to share a couple of things. The first is I'm really thankful that you guys are working on this, because I realize you're volunteering, and it's a very important thing. Second, I want to say thank you to Mr. Weddleton for his presentation, particularly because it may be the first time that I've seen the examples. And frankly, it was inspirational. I thought, wow, if we could do that here, that would be really nice. I think it's a big order, but maybe it can be done. That would be great. The third thing that I want to share with you is that we talked about pre-COVID, we talked during COVID, and we talked about after COVID. And pre-COVID, if we look at Anchorage in general, we have politically, if we divide people up and say, okay, we have conservatives and we have progressives. I don't think before COVID, conservatives really focused on the homeless people, and they probably weren't willing to spend money on that topic, right, or on helping solve that. But after COVID, yes, it's like, okay, conservatives were like, yeah, let's all get together and let's come up with a good plan. We're gonna put some money towards it, and I think everybody was on board. And my point is simply this: I'm worried, and I hope this doesn't happen, but I'm worried that you guys are going to lose the conservatives that before did not want to spend money on this, and it just keeps getting drawn out and drawn out and drawn out. Eventually they're going to go, this is a complete waste of time. Why are we doing this? So I want to share that with you. The last thing I want to mention, and I hope I'm staying within my 3 minutes, is I live in Turnagain, 2 blocks away from the Coastal Trail. Now, Cliff Row is 3 miles down the road. I have found people wandering in our neighborhood, literally trying to find their way out because it's a little complicated at odd hours. And what I'm a little concerned about is that people are going to be, trying to get, when there is no transportation available, they're going to be wandering down that direction trying to find the Cliff Row Center. I kind of like that it's 3 miles down the road, but I am concerned because we use the trail all the time, early in the morning, late at night, all summer long. And I think that's something to consider. I'm not saying don't do it, I'm just saying that's something you have to consider. You really need to make sure that they have a ride when they need a ride if it's going to be 3 miles down the road. Thank you.
Hello, excuse me. My name is Stuart, S-T-U-A-R-T, Grenier, G-R-E-N-I-E-R. I am on the Northeast Community Council. I am chair of the Parks and Trails Committee and Dog Park Committee. Guys, I live at Ground Zero. I understand we have a terrible situation. I have property next to Centennial Park, which is where over 300 folks were housed. My community is really stressed. We are following every knick-knack we pull out of the committee that you guys are taking part in with solving these problems and pulling them out and talking about it on a street, Boundary Avenue. And people are scared to death that what happened last summer is coming back our way. Guys, I've never seen people shout like this. One homeowner said, no, it's not happening again. And the president of my condo association, he carries a big stick and he walks around at night, and he's been assaulted. People coming up on our porches. My condo association has our porches where they're open, 6 plexes. People walk up. People come up there and pick through your stuff. My neighbors have lost stuff, and we found parts of it in the park. One neighbor had his house broke into, and his stuff was spread all over the park like a bear in all his house. Guys, we need to find solutions. People are saying things privately, and you can't push that community any farther. Please go to Centennial Park right now and go through the campground. It's beautiful. The usual campers from all over Alaska and the world are there now. It's a pleasure to go there, and it's managed beautifully. But one thing that keeps coming up, my neighbors who go to work in Anchorage keep saying, why not the Northway Mall? Guys, it's away from the Greenbelt trails. It's got a massive indoor area. It's got a massive outdoor area. Climate change is coming, guys. The bush is gonna unload on us, and people from lower 48 might be coming up here too. That is a facility that we could go with. Please consider what's happening. Centennial Park is not a place to throw people. Let's have one normal summer. My community needs to get its mind straight. One person called me over and over again screaming. They're coming back, and she saw some folks going to the woods, and then the cops came and she screamed at them. I can't really say what other people are saying, but folks, you can only push people so far. And I think that if you could give us a break this year, and then maybe things will calm down next year, but if we could just go to normalcy for 1 year, after how many hundreds? And guys, we hear stories. People are telling us there people are stabbed, more stabbings, and how many shootings actually happen in Centennial Campground? Please, help us.
Can you do me a favor and turn that mic off? Because my sense
Yes, sir.
one mic.
Yeah, we did our part, guys. Turn it off?
Yeah.
Okay, well.
Sorry, it's okay. You're good. I just can't see. Okay, there we go. Okay. All right, there we go. All right. One mic at a time. That's good to know. So, thanks to the last two folks who have spoken. So, I didn't include this in the slides because this presentation is mainly focused around shelter, but I'm going to spend a minute just talking about all of the different lanes of work that are happening right now, because I think folks are probably seeing that a lot in the news, right? They're probably seeing folks talk about the Clean Slate strategy, which is the work that we are focusing right now, which is all around the need for permanent year-round low-barrier shelter. But then there's also other lanes of work that are happening, including sanctioned camps and discussions around sanctioned camps, as well as discussions around behavioral health needs in our community. So I wanna encourage folks to come to the mic and speak on whatever you feel like you need to speak on. But I also wanna encourage folks on top of that to, if you can, address these questions that are on the screen. So thank you so much again for being here, and I'm gonna go ahead and turn my mic off, and then if you can turn that one on, please.
Hello, I'm Matt Duncan from the Spinard Community Council and some other community councils in that area. The criteria that are important to me for the shelters in particular is I need them to be safe enough and pleasant enough that they are a better option than camping. The time that I have spent at Beans Cafe and the stories I heard from the Sullivan is that they were not a better alternative than sleeping in the green strips. So I think ways to do that is to get maybe smaller facilities. I know we're talking about a facility, and John spoke well about how large facilities can work, but we're also not Hollywood, California. We're a smaller town. Maybe smaller facilities are what we need. It'd certainly be easier to sell to residents. You can put one in Spinard anytime. But when I am traveling with the military and I'm put in a room with bunk beds, a bunk bed only holds one person because you have to have a place to put your stuff. So the stuff goes on the top and my body goes on the bottom, and that way I have a place to sleep and a place for my stuff. If you're talking about the portable building solution that we've heard floated, you're looking at 12 bunk beds in there, or 12 beds, 6 bunk beds, that's 6 people, and then you divide up the day into 8-hour chunks to assign people to watch the stuff so that people's stuff doesn't get stolen while they're in the congregate facility. Well, now you have more employees working at that 6-bed facility than you do have people being housed there. So there has to be some level of efficiency so it has to be big enough that you have efficiency, but also small enough that the communities of families or people with children or small family units or people with dogs can be housed at facilities that have more people like them, and the single males can be housed at facilities that are more like them. And maybe that is broken up into a campus, so the campus holds 100 people, but people who are alike are housed together. Mitigation for our neighborhood is solved by the presence of low barrier shelters. If you build us a low barrier shelter, then the people won't be in our neighborhood. So looking forward to that, guys. Thanks. And a well-run shelter to me means that like people are kept with like people. So people in similar circumstances are kept with people in similar circumstances, and they have a place for their stuff, and they have training, because like they are keeping track of their worldly treasure and goods using backpacks and bags and trash bags. I keep track of my treasure with a digital bank account, and they need to learn that skill. That's important. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm George. I think one of the major things that's being missed here is it's very hard to help people until they come to a place that they know mentally, physically, and spiritually, they need to change. I've worked for many, many years with the homeless, with the poor. I come from a sub-income level myself. But one of the major problems is you can provide all those things, but if they don't want to live in a place that makes them feel like it's a hospital, they're going to leave out of that building. I opened the Lusac Hotel on 5th and D Street. The place was beautiful, had everything you could imagine. I physically went to APU, brought back thousands of books, set up libraries, brought in people to teach, train, do all those things that you think people want. Some people want little interference, a nice place to sleep, and feel safe. They don't necessarily want the same comforts that you have. What they're looking for is space to be themselves. One of the major things that are very important is security. Because some of these folks are dangerous. Some are mentally ill. Someone set my yard on fire last night. I had dozens of homeless people crowding into a facility that I hope to renovate one day when I have enough money to do it. My point is, from A to Z, the primary issue is security, enforcing the laws that's on the books. We need to get back to putting some people in mental facilities to be helped. They stopped doing that in the 70s when I worked for South Central Counseling. But it's more than getting them a place to eat, sleep, and that sort of thing. A lot of these folks are just flat out ill, and the hidden darkness is the drug trade. I live in Fairview. I see the homeless every day, people stealing things out of my yard. I don't get mad about that. It just bothers me that it's obvious with all the marijuana stores and all these other things that now they can get from doctors. Then you have police officers. Someone has an overdose. I would not want to be a police officer, try to save somebody's life, and people are going to blame me because that person died for the drugs they took because I may have done something wrong. We've got to get something going where some of these people need to get someplace where they can get mental health. The other is some of them are big con artists. I watch couples walk out, shabby clothes, hi George, etc. They go in the corners and beg 4 or 5 hours. I'll see them later than that day, dressed to the nines, going nice places to eat. I was raised to serve people. My mother has 3 buildings named after her in Baltimore. And I think you have to get to a place, not everybody wants what we think they need. What they need is what they need. A lot of these people are drug addicts, they're sick, and a lot of them I've seen 16-year-olds begging for a ride, but if I give her a ride somewhere, I end up in a situation with police, right? It's a con.
Thank you, sir.
You're very welcome. We got to give them what they need, not what we think they want.
Thank you.
Cool. My name's Chris George. I'm the store manager of the Lowe's on Tudor, right here. I'll use part of my time to talk a little bit about the issues that we have, and then I'll address some of the things that you're wanting up here. I just recently became the store manager here at Lowe's. I spent the last 4 years down in St. George, Utah, where we don't have a huge homeless problem, or we didn't have one down there, but I was 2 hours away from Las Vegas, where they do. But coming up here was eye-opening. I run a $58 million store in our community. We serve a lot of people. About 1,500 people a day come through that building. When I came here and found out that I have to lock my bathroom doors because I have had overdoses in that building from the homeless people that are encamped behind my building. When I found out that one of our cardboard bales got set on fire, where the fire department had to come out and put it out, which made our comm systems, our communication systems, go down for 2 weeks because of a flood that happened inside because of the water that had to be used to put out the fire. Every morning when I drive my building and I have to check and make sure there's no homeless inside of my appliances that could have been dropped there. When I have to make sure that there is nobody in the open top for the trash that we have back there. When I have to unplug the multiple forms of electricity that are plugged into my building every night to keep these people warm behind our building. When I found out that we've spent over hundreds of thousands of dollars to put up a concrete wall behind our building that is now being used for lean-tos and for the tents to be put up against. Every morning having to have employees and hours go out there and sweep up or pick up paraphernalia, needles, baggies, anything like that. We have an issue. And it's a big issue when you're talking about big corporations that are serving the community. I would ask you guys at any point in time, come to my building. I will gladly walk you around it. I will gladly show you what we're dealing with on a daily basis. To say what you're wanting up here, what criteria is important to me, it's the safety of our community. It's the safety of my wife and kids coming to my store to come have lunch with me and being scared to get out of the car because there's somebody walking from around the building. Safety. The dozens of taxis that drop people off every day to go around that wall to get their drugs or to have their drugs given to them. Safety. Safety for everybody in this community. Safety for my employees. I close at 10 o'clock at night. 10 o'clock at night, I have to make sure that my employees go out in bunches so nobody gets hurt. 6 o'clock in the mornings when I open. 5 o'clock in the mornings when I have my morning crew come in. Safety for them to be able to walk into the building while the homeless man sleeps on our chairs that are in front of our store. I would just ask that I understand what a shelter is. I understand how important it is to get those here, but I would say that we need to do this hastily. And it doesn't need to be something that is put in place around some of these areas that have safety concerns and safety issues. Thank you.
I don't want to steal the show or anyone else wants to speak, because I speak at every one of these meetings, and it hasn't gotten me too far. So anyone want to go ahead of me? I'm Ron Oliva, adjacent property owner to the Brother Francis Shelter. I experienced 40 years of what a shelter can do to a business, a family, your religion. It's devastating, and it's killed every spirit I have except to survive. And to hear people complain about the Sullivan or Centennial Park, I have to go and get my lips sewed up, because I think they got just 1/1,000,000th of what I tolerated and put up with no help. And Mr. Weddleton came when I protested, because I didn't want to hurt the donations to what I actually started with Jim Calderola, the Brother Francis Shelter, and donated to the mission. But they lost their way, and they destroyed a neighborhood. Felix was at my house. I told him the story. Recently, I got set back $400,000. They swept my accounts, leaned my properties. It was devastating, but caused by a homeless incident. So you got me. And now I want you to honor what you said you have already done, and that's buy my property. A press release went out by the municipality. They bought it, and they didn't. And through a series of non-responsive government that caused harm, the deal fell through. Now I'm proposing the best location for a sanctioned campsite is my property adjacent to the shelter, 3 acres, fenced, secure, and close to the navigation center. Believe me, no one down there is going to put up opposition to the level of the neighborhood of Centennial Park, the Sully, or anywhere else. And already spent $50,000 by Agnew Beck to study for the purchase of my property, and the recommendations came back from the Fairview Community Council, Third Avenue Radicals, the neighbors, Brother Francis Shelter. Go ahead and buy it. That would be your best investment, because scattering sanctioned cabins across the city will polarize the city. And what the Centennial Park representative said, They're on edge, not conservatives, everyone, and it's gonna turn ugly. So now I get to end, but I wanna summarize that it's the best location. I made a proposal, I sent it to the task force. It's a good investment of the money you have left, and I'll be out of there with at least my life. Do you have any questions?
Thank you, Ron.
Well, thank you, Felix, for allowing me 3 minutes and to summarize. Do you have any questions?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
There we go. I would actually second that. I'm Paul Robarch. I'm lead community patrol for Northeast Anchorage. Northeast Muldoon is one of the, we're just trying to keep it together normally on community patrol. Last year when Centennial opened up, it was like a bomb that went off. And the biggest problem was the migration. You can see the migration. I used to work off Orca and all the services. I've worked with Community Service Patrol for years. The migration from Brother Francis up and down through the woods. That migration happened in Centennial. They go through all the neighborhoods. Muldoon, Fred Meyer's, Walmart. It just was absolutely horrible. The phone calls, the police, they really don't do anything. I get my phone calls nonstop. They just don't have the time. I mean, I've had guns pulled on me from the homeless and, you know, get calls back 2 days later. Yet I get a 3-mile-an-hour speeding ticket out on the highway. So we have a problem with there. I drove around, you look at Mountain View, you look at Cuddy Park, it's spread everywhere. The crime, I work off Denali nonstop, everywhere. The services really are downtown. Community Service Patrol, we take the inebriates and let them sober up there. They have food, they have shelter. You know what I mean? It's not gonna stop anytime soon. So yeah, I second that. I was looking at Third and Eagle. You got plenty of space there. You're not gonna change that, but to spread it out throughout the community the way it's been, it's pretty disheartening. And I implore you guys, everybody, come take a ride with me. You wanna see, you know, it's funny, I was out talking to homeless today, going, where would you guys like to have a shelter? Yeah, I didn't get that many answers besides Hillside with the rich people, but, you know, drive around town, spend some time, and come with me. You know what I mean? I'll show you around. It was absolutely horrible last year, though, I can tell you that. And also, man camps. It's not that hard. I've worked in man camps with 500 workers. You can go to Dutch Harbor and look how they have their setups. 34,000 people come in and work in Dutch Harbor. You know, we can do this. We can find a place. We can set up the shelters, the man camps to house these people, have showers, have some dignity. That's about all I got. Thank you.
All right, hey guys, my name is Gina Richardson. I'm an assistant store manager here for the Tudor location. Just started at this location 2 weeks ago. Previously was at our old Seward location, and I would have to say important criteria for me. I'm a mother of 4 children, and I have to say when I came back to Anchorage after being gone for more than 10 years, I was really saddened to see how the decline has happened to the city of Anchorage. It has now spread out so far, as many of your other people have said, to the point that it is ridiculous. You don't feel safe wherever you go, in all honesty, to the point that when I came out here, I was renting here in Anchorage, had a year contract, decided Anchorage just is not for me. And that's what you're gonna start having with a lot of these communities. They're not gonna wanna be in Anchorage anymore. And these communities are what support our towns and our cities, right? They come and shop in our stores, and that helps support our communities. So it is very, very important that we feel safe. I shouldn't be hearing stories in my store of a homeless person walking into my store with a severed head into the store a couple years ago because somebody had died in the homeless camp behind us. These are stories that people don't want to hear. We feel unsafe. I shouldn't be having my LTR score, which, mind you, LTR stands for likelihood to recommend. And that is what our store is based off of, is how happy are our customers that are shopping there, right? And our LTR is taking a tank, and it's not because of our service. It's because of they are seeing the homeless people walking through our store. They are seeing us having to escort people out. Our loss prevention is nonstop, having to escort people out of our stores, not only because of theft, but because, hey, they think it's okay to use the bathroom, feces, and anywhere that they want to go, right? Finding condoms in our store that are being left there. This is the type of thing that we are having to experience. So yes, we do need something like this in our community, but we need to make sure that it's done right and it's done in the proper manner to where you are not affecting the lives of all of these people in their homes, and you're not affecting the businesses around them. Thank you.
Was that one turned off?
I just turned it off.
Game, okay, wonderful, thank you. Waka, all right. So really quick for the folks who are watching online on the stream, hello. If you want to join in this conversation, this is cumbersome, so my apologies. There isn't really a great way for you to join in, but if you want to email me your thoughts, I will read them to the group, and we will address them if you have like specific questions. So that email for folks who are watching on the YouTube, it's felix.rivera@anchorageak.gov. Again, that's FELIX.RIVERA@anchorageak.gov. With that, we'll go ahead and turn this mic on, and welcome.
Okay. Hi, I'm Melinda Gant. My neighborhood is Government Hill. I work in downtown. I frequent Midtown a lot. That's as far as I go usually, downtown, and then Fairview, of course. So I want to talk a little bit about my experiences and criteria mitigation shelter. And I want to ask the question, are you asking about just low barrier shelter or permanent housing shelters?
We're really talking about low barrier.
Low barrier, okay. So what's important to me for criteria for the low barrier shelter, in my experience of what I've seen since, I would say probably my experience since 2014, and the fiasco that happened with Beans Cafe and Brother Francis, and overgrowing it to the point where there was no security. I saw a bunch of people getting run over on 3rd Avenue. There was people across the street selling drugs openly. And I think people get this horrible taste in their mouth, and then it goes to Sullivan, and of course Centennial. And each example that we've been doing for our city for low barrier shelters has, in my opinion, failed. We've failed ourselves, we failed the people that need help, and we failed the idea of creating a low barrier shelter so that people are okay with it. I think that we need one in Anchorage. However, I don't think it needs to be in neighborhoods. My thought is that a low barrier shelter probably needs to be closer to hospitals. It could be on public land. Primarily, I'm thinking the state of Alaska, since Anchorage is taking the brunt of all of Alaska and taking in folks that are homeless And all of our services are here in one central city. And I do think there should be a partnership between the city and the state for public lands, and it should be close to the hospitals for quick service, whether it's mental health capacity or addiction, or even if they have some kind of medical emergency. So that is my one criteria. And the second criteria, of course, is that I think every shelter that we've seen and failed is that we have not had good security service and mitigation. And I think that has to be a part of it. And as well as the criteria within the space, there has to be a service provider for mental health, a service provider for medical, and security element. Those three have to be within that low barrier shelter. The mitigation, I'm not going to talk about neighborhoods, but I'm sure there's going to have to be mitigation put in place if it's going to be near a hospital area. I'm not sure what that'll look like, but it has to, I'm thinking that the mitigation certainly should be a proposal to the state for funding this. Arrival and shelter, I've already talked about it, and my time is up. Oh, Lord.
My name is Jason Brown, and for the last 7 years now, I've worked asset protection here in Anchorage, and I rise to speak on behalf of probably the 40 or 50 different agents that we have here in the city right now. I currently work for Lowe's as well, but before that I was at Walmart in Midtown for the last 3 or 4 years before that. And so I saw the worst of the worst come through from time to time. And I would always meet these people on some of their worst days. You know, I would see homeless people, you know, we would have to do our job and, you know, get the items back that they stole and see their feet literally falling off their body. I've seen a little bit of everything. Outside of work, I'm a pastor. And so I've also tried to help feed and clothe and try to do those things for the homeless as well. And so I speak on both levels because, yes, we are dealing with a huge crisis, but we also have to remember that these are people as well. And so what criteria is important to me is that we can stand up shelters, but it's what happens when the shelter closes at 10 o'clock in the morning and all of these people are put out onto the street and they just go all over town and do things to businesses and all of those kind of things until we close, and then we go right back to the shelter and we don't see them until the following morning. I've been almost stabbed, I've been pepper sprayed, I've been bear sprayed, I've had all kinds of things happen to me just in the last 3 or 4 years. I can take you to friends of mine that have been stabbed at the Diamond Walmart, right in the front of the store, because a guy stole t-shirts and didn't want to get caught, right? So these are the kind of things that we have to think about as we're standing up shelters. What do they do during the day after that shelter has closed, right? So I was in Sullivan a lot. I did everything I could to try to help there. I saw how it was set up. I saw how the totes were constantly being stolen. I hate to say that after the presentation that we have, but I'm currently working with homeless people that are in the hospital right now, and also in rehabilitation centers because they were beat up, because, you know, there were things that happened to them at the Sullivan Arena, and they've been changed forever because of it. So I just ask that as we look at these kind of things, that we look at the day side as much as we look at the evening.
evening. My name is Jason Delozier. This will be going on year 3 of coming to meetings like this. Many of these individuals up here have seen me, have heard me, like many of us have spoke before. First and foremost, for criteria, I respectfully disagree, Ron. I do not think that we need a one consolidated area for those in need to be placed. Scattered shelters will be bettered, and when I say scattered, smaller shelters, they need to be tailored and focused on the needs of the individuals. And dividing those individuals up will offer that. So when you have a social worker that has to constantly switch hats to serve a family, to serve a single male in between the ages of 25 to 65, and they have to continually do that, it's hard for them to give good tailored services. If we scatter these shelters out smaller, that's going to allow that. Also, it will alleviate some, not all, of the predatory individuals that prey on those that are really, really vulnerable. I use Centennial has been brought up. When I walk through Centennial, the population that I work with, I know individuals that are homeless, and I recognize the vehicle. By the time I got all the way around to almost to the end of Centennial Park, that vehicle was over there. The individual came around, and I recognized that individual. With that being said, he was probably not doing good things in there. Probably dealing drugs, maybe other substances, I'm not sure. However, if you consolidate everyone into one area and not focus and tailor things, that allows for that to happen. Again, it's not going to alleviate all, but it will make it more challenging for these individuals to, again, prey on those who are vulnerable. Criteria. Security has been mentioned. Security should be at the top of the foremost, especially if this is anywhere near within a 2-mile radius of a neighborhood. And that was something that was brought up early on that it continues to be, in my opinion, overlooked. A 2-mile radius. So that means even though it's a low barrier shelter, as we've all heard before, there would be rules still in this low barrier shelter, which could result in some individuals not receiving shelter. So where would they be? It's a false reality to think that they're always going to be congregating right outside that shelter. As we've heard before, they're going to move into neighborhoods, they're going to look for things to take, as some of you have said, and that would happen. So if you have a wider radius to protect neighborhoods, that would be better. Lastly, we need an expert. With all due respect to you, John, you're not an expert. You've toured and you're helping, and we appreciate that. However, Pine Street Inn, low barrier shelter, less than 2 blocks away, around the corner of another street, there was over 300 campsites near that low barrier shelter. So we can't say that a low barrier shelter is going to solve this. Again, I'm not standing up here as the all-knowing, but just from experience of doing this now for 3 years, I've heard a lot of things, of research like many of us have, and we're all trying to help this problem. But we need a true expert to come in and guide us. Thank you.
In the right place, Tony? There we go. All right. All right. There we go. Okay, I'm gonna stay here. So, again, I want to thank you all for coming. I have a few slides to close, just to talk a little bit about next steps. But I just want to give an opportunity if anyone else would like to speak, or again, if you're not comfortable speaking, these same prompts are up on sheets of paper in the atrium. So if you want to just write, if you don't want to come and speak, you can do that as well. And actually, I gave my email, but I haven't checked it, so let me check it really quick. All right, doesn't look like I've gotten any emails. Okay, so I'm gonna close this off with a few slides. Just again, talking about the next steps here. So after these 3 town halls, there are going to be a series of housing and homelessness committee meetings where we will talk about criteria for shelter. And the idea behind these committee meetings is that at the end of these 3 meetings, we will have hopefully put together some type of resolution which the Assembly can consider because as I shared with you earlier in the presentation, the facilitated collaborative process and the Emergency Cold Weather Shelter Task Force came up with different criteria, but the municipality and the Assembly have never actually adopted criteria for shelter. And so the idea here is that we will formally adopt criteria for shelter. We will formally adopt criteria for shelter, and maybe this. All right. Okay, great. I think that works better. Thank you. So we will. I'm just gonna move. So we will formally. I'm gonna ask you to move the slides. So we will formally adopt criteria for shelter. I think the idea is that it's going to be introduced for the Assembly meeting of June 20th, and then there's going to be a public hearing and possible vote on July 11th. So if folks want to engage in that public hearing, July 11th is going to be the date. Next slide, please. So after the July 11th date, well, yeah, this is when we will have the possible vote on the adoption of criteria. Next slide, please. After the adoption of criteria, then we're going to go through the process of location, right? That's the next phase of the work. And so we're going to be looking at all the different locations that have been explored in the last several years, and there's a lot of different locations. And we are going to basically do an analysis of looking at all those locations, looking at all the criteria that we've developed, and see what's left. See how many locations match the criteria that we have developed as a community. And then from there, next slide please, there's gonna be a second series of town halls, and they're not dates to be determined. I should update that. We actually do have dates for them in July and August, where we are gonna be talking about locations and presenting, hopefully at the end of the exercise that we go through, there are a variety of locations for us to present and have discussions as a community in these town halls. And then from there, there's a big note highlighted in yellow. The process really hasn't been fleshed out from there because it's hard for me. I don't have a crystal ball. I don't know what's going to happen between now and these town halls. But certainly after that, the intent is we have to make a decision, right? We can't hide from that fact that we must make a decision. And then really August to November is about making that decision, getting the shelter stood up, getting the providers on board, and doing our darndest that come November 1, but at least by the end of the year, that shelter will be stood up and running, and we will finally, after years of failing and trying and failing again, have a new permanent year-round low barrier shelter in our community. Next slide, please. I think this last one. Yep, that's it. So again, thank you all so much for coming today, and if you want to come back to the next town hall tomorrow or on Monday, feel free to come back. Otherwise, the next opportunities to engage are going to be those housing and homelessness committee meetings. I want to encourage everyone to go to the Assembly's website on the homelessness focus page. There's a specific page there for the clean slate strategy. You can see the timeline, the slides are up there. As we progress, a lot more information is going to be uploaded onto that site. So that's really the one where if you want to get updates on this work and engage in the work, that's where you should do it. With that, thank you so much and enjoy the rest of, oh yeah, sure, go ahead.
My name's Monty Wallace. I moved here in '81. My parents moved here in 1970 in Eagle River. They didn't even lock their doors then. I didn't lock my doors in Anchorage in '81. I have seen this town go down and down and down with the assembly. The mayor had a solution, and the solution was a navigation center. Put them all together, take care of all their individual needs. This is what the rescue mission does. The rescue mission lets them come in. They have to be clean. They have to want to work. These people that are in all these tents, they don't want to work. Make them work. Make them clean their mess up. Make them do, I don't know what to say. I think the navigation center that the mayor wanted would be good. Finish it, put them all in there, or else move them to Fire Island. But we have to feel safe in Anchorage, and I don't feel safe. I talked to somebody at Walmart. They said the homeless sleep in the flowers now. They have to try to kick them out. And I live one street over from Takishla Park. I don't feel safe. And people have told me, Monty, you can't go on that park, into that park by yourself. And I remember Aaron used to play Little League in there. We used to have hockey practice in there. We used to have picnics in there for the whole community of near Takishla. And it's gone downhill so bad, and I've heard now people are moving away. They're selling their homes. Their property value is going down because of this. And another solution is send them one-way ticket wherever they came from. And I've heard that some people in Oregon get sent up here, one-way ticket. From Portland, one-way ticket, and not go back. And I don't know what happened to all the natives. They need to go back where they came from. Everybody needs to go back. We need a safe Anchorage again. Thank you.
All right, so there was a comment that just came in. And Daniela, if you're still watching, I did see it before I officially closed, so you're good. So I'm just gonna read this comment verbatim. My name is Daniela Delozier. I have lived in Anchorage since 2008 and work in public health. The criteria for placement of a low barrier shelter to me is for it not to be placed in wooded areas of town. I live on the east side of town and witnessed the Elmore fire a few years ago, and it was uncontrolled and extremely dangerous to the homes and businesses in that area. This factor would also rule out a shelter being near hospitals, as someone suggested. This is a small town and hospitals are not that far away wherever you put a low barrier shelter, but the hospitals are all near neighborhoods and woods. So thank you for emailing in that comment, Daniela. I think with that, I will go ahead and wish everyone a good evening. Thank you all.